Public School is supposed to be on the meeting. So they might be in the waiting room. I'm not sure. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to start the webinar now. Claudio, I'm going to just go into the translation and make sure that everything's working with that. So give me a second.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I have learned something after all this Zoom. So are you all set, Claudio? Just give me a thumbs up. Perfect. Okay, great. All right, so I am gonna kick this off. Everybody ready? Okay, all right. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third and final virtual workshop for the Reimagine McKinley School project. I'm Julie DeMauro with the Office of Planning and Community Development. With me is the Director of Planning and Community Development, Tech Lang. We also have with us our architects that are helping to walk us through this design process. We have Sophie from Studio Luz and Elise from Studio Luz as well. There'll be a 15-minute presentation regarding what the McKinley School looks like now and how it can be reimagined and repurposed for the community. There'll be a short exercise afterward. And we ask that you hold all questions and comments till the end of the presentation. If you have any questions in the meantime and you'd like to put it into the chat, feel free to do so. And this presentation is being recorded and will be made available also on our project page, which is www.revere.org/McKinley. So without further ado, we're going to turn this presentation over to Sophie and Elise. Thank you.
So hi everybody, I'm Sophie Norman. I'm the Community Engagement Liaison from Studio Luz Architects. And I'm just going to walk us through sort of the overview of the project introduction, sort of what we've been looking at, where the project is located, and sort of some of the key considerations to get us thinking about what we want to imagine for the future of the McKinley School moving forward as we go into the two sort of personal voice and group thinking exercises after the presentation. So the mission for transforming the McKinley School is to create it as a beacon of accessibility that has sort of education and making as the prime program element, as well as spaces for entrepreneurship, creating networks for economic mobility through workforce training opportunities, and for it to serve as a community asset. The primary tenant is going to be early education and childcare, and then supported by a constellation of support spaces for workforce development and entrepreneurship. This is in part informed by the Revere Public Schools community survey, where a centralized early childhood center was listed as the priority number 3 for the district. And Revere Public Schools has a vision of building out a centralized early education childcare program that will be completed by 2024, which was accepted by the school committee. As Studio Luz has sort of been looking at the site, part of what is being considered is a collaboration with Suffolk Downs, where the workforce and educational program needs for the city of Revere would sort of be supported between the two different sites, where McKinley School has early education and care, workforce training, small entrepreneurship opportunities, and some performance or art gallery space. Suffolk Downs is carrying sort of the innovation center, training and entrepreneurship facilities, along with retail, residential, office, laboratory, and hotel spaces. So those two spaces can work in tandem to serve the needs of the city. As we're looking at some of the stakeholders, this is spread across the education, entrepreneur, and workforce community organizations. that we've sort of identified within Revere, and these would be targeting the specific use groups and programs that we're looking at for the McKinley School, and sort of where it's located within this workforce development region. So as I mentioned earlier, the program we're looking at is an educational program with a constellation of entrepreneur, workforce, community organizations, and community asset spaces that sort of support and help create a vibrant and community asset within the McKinley School. Something that we've heard is incredibly important and recognized is the diversity of the Revere population and the Revere demographics. Youth is considered an incredibly strong asset among many stakeholders within the Revere population. In the school district, 57% is a Latinx population, and incumbent language skills are incredibly important in terms of developing the community and growth in terms of economic mobility and for working development programs. Looking at the context and site considerations, we are aware that McKinley School is really centrally located within the city, specifically in Ward 4, and is essentially right in the backyard and very accessible to residents within this area. It's right by City Hall, the New Hills School, and so you can sort of see what we've identified as the 5-minute walking radius from the McKinley School, as well as there are certain MBTA and transit thoroughfares that go right through here. And so we're considering the accessibility of the site as a huge asset in terms of what programs we consider for siting within the McKinley School. And just an overview of the existing conditions of the McKinley School and why it was relocated. It was originally designed for 350 students. The population has nearly doubled in the area, and with only one set of bathrooms located in the basement and odd-shaped classrooms, it really no longer served the school demographic population. And so the school was moved, and now we have an open slate where we can reprogram each of the floor plates while working within the existing building structure. So looking at the overall scope of work and what is sort of available to work with within the McKinley School, we have about 36,600 gross square feet that we will be working on reprogramming for educational and community activities. We're currently at the phase of doing community engagement to determine exactly which programmatic needs. And then Studio Luz is going to make recommendations for architectural improvements that will support these newly identified programming. And something we've heard as a really important consideration is a new elevator for the space, as well as taking in consideration outdoor areas, one specifically allocated to the early education and care, but also opportunities with the existing basketball courts that are there and additional outdoor space. And so in terms of the programmatic space division, we're looking at, of the usable square footage, we have about 24,000 square feet of occupiable space, with the rest being circulation space. And of that, we're looking at or proposing about half of that being allocated and distributed for early education and care programs, and then the remaining open square footage being divided as entrepreneurship and community spaces for various organizations and programs within Revere. And so here you can sort of see that breakdown of exactly what would go into each of the program spaces as we've started discussing with certain stakeholders and what's been identified so far. But part of what we're trying to figure out is specifically what programs should be and are most important to have in this space. So for early education and care, we're looking at classrooms, teachers' lounges, different support spaces, and then workforce training and entrepreneur opportunities such as offices, incubator spaces, and perhaps some innovation and lecture presentation spaces as well. And this is sort of Studio Luz's first stab and proposal of what that could look like with what we have been working with as this 50-50 division of 50% of the space being early education and care, with the other remaining being entrepreneur and innovation spaces. And we've sort of looked at distributing early education care across the first and second floor, while also making spaces on the first, basement, and third floor that would support the community asset and innovation spaces, not to siloize each floor into one specific program, but to allow for some dynamic interactions between the different program groups. And so here you can see the basement being allocated for innovation and entrepreneurship spaces. The first floor plan being half for early education classrooms, with the other half being incubator or office spaces. The second floor plan being various educational spaces and classroom spaces. And then the third floor serving as additional innovation or community asset space. So I think if there are no questions at this point about specifically what we've presented so far, we can kind of get into that now and then move into the 2 focus group and engagement exercises via concept board. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions in the Q&A or not.
I don't think anybody have any questions at this time. So we'll continue on with the interactive part of the presentation.
Perfect. So the first sort of interactive portion is called personal voice, and we're going to spend about 20 minutes. If people can sort of raise their hand and answer the questions as they come up on the screen, then offer sort of their answer to the question to the group. Elise and I will record it on the concept board and sort of take notes, and then we can kind of open a discussion and a forum through that. So for the first question, what we're asking is, what would you like to see happen at the McKinley School? We've proposed some options such as workforce training, the performance art gallery spaces, outdoor areas, entrepreneurship or business incubator spaces, those early education spaces, community and community education spaces, or something else. So if anybody wants to raise their hand or just unmute themselves and interject.
Anybody has any comments that they'd like to add to this part of the presentation, please raise your hand. And I don't see any at this time.
If other people would also just prefer to, voice in the chat which spaces from the sort of selection below they would prefer to see, that's also an option in terms of participation if you don't want to speak. If nobody has anything to say, I think I can just move on to other questions. And if people have input that they would like to interject or share, we can always circle back to the previous question as well.
My apologies, Claudia. I was just on a call. If I could just speak on behalf of Dr. Kelly and I with regard to some of the ideas that we have for the use of the McKinley School. My name is Joanna Rizzo. I'm the Director of Student Services for Revere Public Schools, and I oversee all of the early childhood programming here in the district. One of the visions that we see for use in the McKinley School is to create an early learning center to use some of the space within the building to support our early childhood program. One of the things that we're really excited about is to increase our capacity for early childhood programming, and that's something that you spoke about in your presentation. And we'd really like to be able to partner with some of the other programs that we've talked about at previous meetings. with the community programs for seniors and community programs for veterans that we've talked about that we hope to house in this building as well. So we're really looking forward to working collaboratively with those groups as well.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And so I think also just for other people who may not have been at the previous meetings, what Joanna is talking about are opportunities for seniors to be partners with the Early Education Center, and as well as opportunities potentially for the high schooler volunteers as well. I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that, just so that other people might have a jumping off point.
Sure. One of the things that we do here at Revere High School is we run internships. So we're also hoping to partner with the high school in increasing the capacity for students to participate in intern programs and having our interns practice their teaching skills in the early childhood program, and also partnering with the City of Revere and the Mayor's office to have our senior citizens doing the abatement program employment within the early childhood program as well, whether it be working in the offices or possibly working within our classrooms. We're really hoping to increase opportunities for our young students to interact with other members of our community.
Yes, thank you so much for elaborating on that. Does anybody else have anything? I can't see everybody who's participating, but if anybody else has something to share, or I can go on to the next question.
So Gina has something. Gina, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see and hear from what the vision is from an educational point of view, to see the blended learning, I guess, of the Early Education Center and working with the seniors and vets. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. You have other things listed there, and I know I was on the other day, and I'm just thinking, it'd be nice to make sure it's cohesive. Is the vision of the entire place a learning center, or workforce? Or I know that you indicated that there's other rooms or availability for space there. I'm just thinking it just needs to have a cohesive vision of is it a learning center, or do we have that ample room in there that it is okay that we're going to have other things such as an art gallery, and or is it supposed to be blended, is my question. Just from an outside person looking in as to what is that clear vision.
Right. So
I think that's part of the exercise of all of these community workshops, is to figure out what the complementary use will be in this building, along with the early childhood center and care. So that is part of this exercise, and we're taking everybody's input and feedback to understand the community needs and what the appropriate or complementary uses can be within this building. So that's still yet to be determined. We'll know a little bit more after these community workshops have been reviewed. Tech and myself and the designers at Studio Luz have had a chance to look at the feedback from the survey that's out online. So there's still a lot to be determined, but that is the purpose of these meetings, is to understand what the other uses of the building could be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So jumping off of the first question of what you would like to see here, are there things that you would like to not see happen here? Are there things that you do not feel are complementary to sort of the early educational aspect of the program? Such as, do you think that these proposed spaces may not be the best fit for that, or are there other places in the district that are sort of meeting those needs? I know that was something that was brought up in the discussion on Monday, is that there are a lot of anticipated programs being planned for the new high school in Revere. And so that perhaps some of these spaces could also be doubled or work in satellite with the high school program.
So, folks, I just want to flag a couple of things. There are two questions, and I don't know if they've been addressed. I don't think so, based on the timestamps from Kristen Janjar. Welcome, Kristen, in the Q&A. So, Elise or whoever's off mic from the Studio Lose team. I'm not sure if you can actually see those questions directly.
Yep, I can see them. Kristen, just to respond to those. Sophie, could you mute? Sorry about that. We're both in the same office. But Kristen, just to answer some of your questions. So what we sort of had covered in the beginning portion of this presentation was how we're starting to approach reprogramming the McKinley School. And so McKinley School is approximately 36,000 square feet. Looking at all 4 floors from the basement, first floor, second floor, third floor. And given our initial studies of the plan, we had dedicated around 50% of the programming to the EEC, for early learning. And then we are sort of trying to garner from you and the community at large how you would like to see the rest of that space being programmed. So that's kind of where our discussion is leading right now. As for the other questions, we're still in the early stages of a planning study. So we haven't been addressing any of those issues as of yet. Those would come in later in the process. Right now, we're just focusing on how we could reprogram the building. So it's getting a big vision and big picture of what you would like to see there. I hope that answered most of your questions. Please feel free to keep popping them in the chat and we can answer them as they come up as well.
Thank you, Elise, for getting those questions. So yeah, I don't know if we want to jump back to if there are things that people would not like to see happen in here, or if we can move to a different question that might have more response.
I have another question, and it kind of addresses what we do not want to see here. But I think earlier in the presentation, you had indicated that an early learning center was, I think, priority number 3 from the community. Could you tell us what the other priorities were, 1 and 2?
So I can actually clarify that. That was a priority for the school district. So a couple of years ago, the school district did a survey of students and families and other community stakeholders around what district priorities were for the school department to address. The first were, I think, number 1 and 2 were becoming a one-to-one device district for all students, which we've accomplished, and also increasing the rigor and the quality of the curriculum across the district. Number 3 in that survey as a priority for all students and families was to create a more centralized early learning center. And so because we have accomplished number 1 and number 2 on the survey, the next focus area for Dr. Kelly and I would be to try and create a more centralized early childhood center. And so using some of the McKinley School does fit within that vision.
Exactly, especially with the central location and accessibility considerations of where it is in the district.
Perfect. Thank you for explaining that. From what survey it came from. I thought it was the community survey. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know Gina has also seen this question already, so I'll move to something. When you walk through the door, are there spaces that you would like to see first? Is it the smiling face that tells you where you're going? Is it signage? Is it artwork or displays from the community? Gina, you had mentioned being interested in information about things happening in the McKinley as well as in town in the previous discussion, and as well as are there open spaces to hang out or community activities? Anybody would like to interject? I also see some questions coming up in the Q&A. Kristen is saying that pre-K for all kids in Revere would be a great addition. So I'm wondering, is that something that you think should happen within this early education and care, or is that something that would be part of the overall public school program? You could elaborate on that. That's not something I'm totally versed in.
Kristen, I echo. I think it would be a great idea too. Unfortunately, I think that's a wish list item for both of us somewhere down the line.
Thank you. And I see, thank you, Claudio, for translating that. Olga's writing, I think the Center for Childcare would be the best. So we really appreciate you sharing that feedback, and Elise will incorporate it into the comments. I think that sort of falls under what spaces are the most important to you that you would want us to consider. I think what we're hearing is that these early education spaces are really a huge priority for what goes into the McKinley School. But I don't know if there are further periphery spaces that would support the mission and the views that you have for this intergenerational programming, et cetera. Like, are there other things that you see in this programming matrix that we kind of have up of what would be supporting and adding to that vision you already have for including the veteran programs or the high school or internship opportunities, if there should be additional community education spaces that are separate from the early education spaces, if it should be multicultural events. I'm not sure if you have some input on that, Joanna.
That I don't know. I know that everything, when we think about the high school internships, that obviously would be housed out of the new high school and out of the current high school, obviously. As far as workforce training spaces, I don't know. At our original meeting, we had talked about having programs specifically for seniors at the transformed McKinley School, and also doing some programs for veterans within the space. Those are the things that come to mind for me that I'm familiar with. And I know that we did talk about some community arts programming.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question or clarification also from the community? Again, this is Gina. You talk about it being a centralized location for early education, and I truly value that. My whole history is in early education. So what are the numbers that we're looking at across the city that would, that's necessary? Is it within the local community there, or is my question, are the numbers high enough that we're going to have to transport them, or parents are going to have to travel and bring them there? Are those numbers high enough versus does each school lend itself to eventually offer this early education within each school, and is there space available that will be a priority?
So I can speak generally to that, and I don't want this to turn into a solely early childhood meeting, because again, this is a community meeting for all of the ideas that we have for revisioning the McKinley School. We have early childhood programming throughout the district in 3 different locations. This would be a 4th location that we would have early childhood programming in. Students are placed in different areas. Typically, it's not based on where you live. Students some students are transported by the district. Other students are transported by their families. That's an individual that's determined by various factors. But this would be a 4th site for early childhood students to attend. But again, I really don't want to get too far into an early childhood conversation because again, it is about the building as a whole right now.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share about what spaces are most important for you and for us to consider when doing the programming for the future of this space, and aside from the early education and care, so that we can sort of make sure that everybody's voice is heard in terms of what goes into this building? If not, we can sort of go into the other questions about sort of design and what those different types of spaces would look like for the building. So if we're looking at performance art and cultural spaces, what we're going to do here is sort of look at a few images that we've provided as examples of what those spaces could look like. And if everybody just wants to sort of raise their hand and share what aspects of these spaces or design about them or ideas contained within them they feel would be a great addition to the space. And we can have sort of jumping off point. The first one we can take a look at is sort of art and cultural spaces. If you feel that that space should be open, should have fixed mirrors, if it should be with just sort of an open informal classroom where instrument or dance instruction could happen? Is it more of an art gallery with mobile displays? Is it where somebody could have a presentation or do sort of a public performance space? Or is it an informal sort of vibrant gathering space where perhaps some arts programming also takes place? And so also feel free to just shout out letters of ones that you find most interesting, or type it in the Q&A chat area as well. We have both open. And so if you want to, I don't know, Gina, if you have something, I know you were at the one previously, you wanted to sort of share.
Yeah, I mean, and it's great that I was there before because I've had time to ponder as what was needed and listening to others too, as well as indicating my voice. But, I think we voiced and continue to voice the ability for flexibility, the ability for it to have flexibility, and D comes to mind, although that looks so, it looks very cold. But I like the idea of flexibility. And we talked about privacy and the needs for that with certain meetings or trainings. So, and I know someone was talking about education classes that could hold. So, whether it's exercise and things like that. So where it could hold small amounts of people, yet also maybe doors or flexibility with bifold walls, it could open up for larger classes. I think someone last time mentioned Zumba or exercise, So I think something like that, although that looks so cold, I'd like something, where we could incorporate the art from the community is great too.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gina.
Go ahead, Gina.
I'm sorry. I think that formal C wouldn't, to me, that would envision if we really are going to have a heavy area of local performance, and if that's the go, then I think you would need something like a C. But if and I think they talked about that being more at the high school. So to me, if this is going to be an area where we're going to have the workforce and you're going to have meetings and you need some privacy, but then there also needs to be areas and access to flexibility, then D seems more like it than C really, unless there's that seating can be moved. I don't know. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Gina. And on that topic of flexibility, this is Tech Lang speaking. I'm going to actually reference an earlier question that Kristen submitted in the Q&A, which was, can walls be removed? And the answer is, it depends. And the question I would have for Kristen in return, if she's able to respond, is, for what would you want to program the space without walls and with walls? That's helpful guidance and input for this team, for things that work well or things that are challenging that you've seen in other spaces. So you can respond to that in the Q&A, but it's an invitation for you to chime in by going off mute, or for the Studio Lose team to respond.
Thank you so much, Tech, for providing that jumping off point. And I think that is the question, right? Is for what purpose is the flexibility? Where is that flexible space being located, and who really needs that, and what spaces need to be more defined and rigidly enclosed and set with programming? I'm not sure if Kristen is typing in the Q&A. Here we go, yes. So Kristen, you're saying, I think the setup inside the building depends on what the space will be available for. If it would be available for sign up for community meetings, then seating with flexibility would be helpful. Also, the space could be for rent for birthday parties. That would be also great, as getting space in the city for parties that doesn't smell like smoke, like the Legion or the Elks Club does. So you're envisioning it as sort of community, like a space where various community groups could sign up and sort of use the space occasionally for various community programming or activities. And so having a space that meets perhaps more that need than something that is more dedicated for performance or art spaces, but more community gathering and event space. So feel free to correct me if I'm misunderstanding what you're going for. I think the next spaces that we're talking about are also workspaces, whether that's workspaces for various organizations, for workforce development, as other community resource spaces. Something we'd heard before was a place for residents to get help with tax preparation or information regarding that, as well as workspaces for people working in the early education care. I know there are office spaces associated with that. And so I think getting some feedback on what those workspaces should be like and what the different sort of office and office needs are in relation to those programs. And I'm seeing Kristen also asked a question earlier about whether there are business incubator workforce spaces going in to the Suffolk Downs development, and that she doesn't want to see this space to be a repeat of other spaces around the cities and to not see a duplication within the different development spaces that are going on. So I'm not not sure if, Joanna, if you have any input on what type of office spaces and types of like workspaces work best for those offices and space, like support spaces for the early education and care, what those qualities need to be, whether they're individual and privately acoustic, or if they can be semi-open and sort of shared in small group office spaces.
So from the district's piece of it for the early childhood part, they would need to be more private office spaces. The registration office would be accessible, would need to be accessible to the public for families, as well as the evaluation suite, but that would be it. Other than that, the administration piece would need to be more private.
This is Gina again, and in regards to the look and feel of the space there, I think we talked about, having some areas for privacy, as well as, I know some of these have glass, and there was a security issue we talked about last time, and I reiterate that. The noise level is something we have to consider too, and then the privacy. I can't reiterate that enough. And I think it was Olga at the last meeting who addressed some of those needs as well. I was just recently in Chelsea yesterday and at one of their facilities, Connect, and it's beautiful, but the sound and the privacy was an issue. It's nice and open. But even if I was talking to the receptionist, should be more of a private conversation. Even some of the workspace there was open and people are working, but it was all open. And, you're talking about conversations that should be a little bit more private. And I'm sure they have space for that. But it's something you just really need to reiterate that is an option and that's available for people. And I think Olga mentioned that need more than anybody. So we have to consider that, although some of these are beautiful looking. I just don't know if that space is really what we need.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the sensory considerations to take into consideration with especially some of those more sensitive and private conversations, as well as who these community organizations would be serving in terms of what their needs are, and sort of making sure that the space feels safe and welcoming for everybody who the organizations would be serving as well.
Yeah, it was truly remarkable how much the noise was carrying. They have those things where they don't have the ceilings in and the pipes are exposed, which is great and it's probably economical. But the sound was really reverberating throughout, so you couldn't have that conversation.
Very overwhelming in terms of sensory overload. So Kristen, I see you asked if there is an elevator in the building currently. There currently is not. That is something that we are aware of and would be taken into consideration with our future spatial recommendations for the building as we go into more design-oriented plans after this community engagement process and getting the feedback of what programming, that we can figure out where best an elevator fits within fitting all those program elements as well. And in terms of classrooms and multi-purpose spaces, there's a couple options that we've sort of put forward of what types of qualities those education spaces would have, whether it's sort of a hands-on learning environment with multiple different stations in them, whether there's built-in storage with flexible seating so the space can be rearranged, if it should be intergenerational education and care, which I know we've sort of touched on already, or also looking at what those outdoor play and education spaces in tandem with the education center would be. I think I just saw a question from Kristen about outdoor space. She mentioned a water park for the kids would be great. So that's not something that's really an asset available elsewhere in the city. So there is additional outdoor space right now. I'm not sure if there's necessarily room or infrastructure available on this site for that. That's something that we would need to look into. But there is outdoor space available for public play, whether that's basketball courts or a different sort of play environment. So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that, Kristen, about what other outdoor spaces you see would be great. Or Joanna, if you have additional input on sort of what types of classroom spaces and setups really suit the early education and care program best.
So as far as the early childhood program goes, we're not at the point yet where we're designing the classrooms. They'll probably be very similar to the classrooms that we currently have now. As far as outside planning, this program would have to have a developmentally appropriate outdoor play space as well as an indoor gross motor play space. And we would also want to create an indoor sensory play space similar to what we have at the Beachmont School. So those would be.
You said at the Beachmont School?
Yes, we have an indoor gross motor sensory gym at the Beachmont. So we're hoping to replicate that in this space as well.
Thank you. And then I think one of the other community and sort of program spaces that has been touched on in a few other conversations is a kitchen space, as well as like community lounge spaces. And so I think if we can have sort of a conversation about what sort of that kitchen or community space would look like, who would be using it, who is it for? Is it sort of a commercial kitchen for business incubators to be based out of, a food truck service? Is it a kitchen that is just serving the early education and care space? Is that two separate entities within the building? Or is there some sort of open commercial food service oriented space within the building as well? Is it just a coffee bar? That kind of question. If nobody has anything, I think we'll just move on to the other spaces, innovation and workforce spaces. What do those look like? Are they open and collective, more trades-oriented training? Are they mobile furniture? Are they semi-open? Are they these private small groups with sound isolated spaces? Or is it semi-private, cubicle oriented spaces where people can work on there's job applications or getting help with the resources that they need? I know this is sort of in line with some of the conversations that you were part of, Gina, in the previous meeting about Olga's organization and what they need specifically. But if we have other thoughts for different programs or what other organizations might need. And so I think there's just one last space. If nobody has any comments regarding those spaces, and that's for specifically business incubator spaces, whether those are individual offices where somebody can work on their own business enterprise. Are they more conference rooms that people can use for specific business meetings? If they are these private sound isolated spaces to meet with clients. But this is sort of the last slide. So if people also have any closing thoughts that they would like to share at this point, instead of commenting on a specific space, we can record those now and then conclude meeting. Did I just see, did Gina raise her hand?
No, I appreciate the offer for input. I'm just, I think we've said in the last meeting indicated the need for the flexibility and the privacy, but opportunities for, if we're going to have the businesses there, I guess they need more flexibility. And some of these are just so open, it seems unrealistic to the sound like D. That's just too much, but I can't see several people being able to operate within there. But I understand we have to think of new ways of doing business, but I'm not sure how much we can adapt to that.
Well, I think that is all of the slides that we have, and that's sort of the end of the activity. But as Julie had mentioned, if people have further input that they would like to share, that can be found on the revere.org/McKinley page, and there's a survey with the same images that we've shown here. So if you have further thoughts and just want to share your input at that point, that's an option as well.
Sophie, do you want to stop sharing the presentation for right now? And so I want to thank everybody again for joining us this afternoon, as well as for sharing the link and sending out the information to other community-based partners. This is a process. It's going to take some time. The McKinley School is probably one of our more structurally sound facilities within our network of building facilities for the city of Revere. Obviously, we want to repurpose the building so that it can serve a wide variety of needs for the community, not just for early childhood, but for other community needs such as workforce development or social service programming, or any type of makerspace, incubator space. So it's been great to have everybody kind of give us their thoughts and ideas about how best to use the space. We'll be keeping our public comment portion of this part of the project, phase 1, open for about another week. So if there's any additional comments or thoughts that you would like to share regarding the McKinley School, what should be there, feel free to either email me at jdemaro@revere.org, or you can go onto the public input page at www.revere.org/McKinley, and you can add your comments there. But this has been a great presentation, and we're very excited to see what design iterations and concepts, as well as the use of space that Studio Luz will be presenting to us in April. That meeting is tentatively set for April 25th. Location is to be decided, but we are excited to see the final iteration or building concept. And those iterations and building concepts will be what will help us to determine the next steps. So whether it's an assessment of conditions inside the building or architectural and ADA compliance assessments, all of those will be presented as well. And then we will be able to plan the next steps for the building and have it operational hopefully by 2024. Does anybody have any last minute questions or comments that they would like to tell us now prior to ending the presentation? Okay, this concludes our presentation. We have one. Thank you, Gina, for participating. This concludes our presentation, and this is the last final community workshop for the McKinley School. You can watch the recorded versions of all the meetings on our webpage, as well as Revere TV at YouTube. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.